everybody. It was an honor to follow Dr. Bjornor. Thank you for not all getting up and leaving now that you heard her speak, so thanks for sticking around for this. And thanks for the introduction to the Bahamas Sea Turtle Network. This talk I'm going to give now is discussing a study that was just completed at the end of last year and focusing in on what is the knowledge that is already out there in terms of conservation of sea turtles, and how much do Bahamians know about sea turtles, and what might be some gaps that we can fill through education and research as well. So first, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background about sea turtles themselves. So we're going to talk through this diagram looking at the life cycle of sea turtles. And let's start off with the nesting of females. So females will return to the beach where they, in fact, were born themselves, many hundreds of miles, potentially even thousands of miles moved from where they were previous. They'll haul themselves up on the beach, they'll find a good spot, and start to dig their nest. And when they found that good spot, they might lay several clutches of eggs during the nesting season, and then they'll depart, and they'll never see their offspring again. Now, over the course of after about 2 months or so, those sea turtles are going to hatch. You can see this is a pretty amazing photo of the hatchlings emerging from the nest. If any of these photos are yours in the audience, thank you very much for letting me use them. These guys are really incredible little animals. They're only a couple of inches long, and once they've emerged from the nest, they start making their crawl out to the sea. And for a really long time, it was unknown where these young turtles were heading to, as we didn't see them in the sizes afterwards, and we'd only see them appearing as juveniles in our coastal system. So through some of the satellite telemetry work that's been done by other groups, we now know that they head out into the open ocean and rely a lot on open ocean currents to move them to their next landing spot. And they'll spend time, for instance, in the North Atlantic, they'll spend time in the Sargasso Sea, living in these mats of sargassum, just feeding and getting bigger before they slowly head back in near shore. And for instance, here in the Bahamas, they'll show up in our nearshore bays and mangrove creeks, and this is a juvenile sea turtle there. And they're coming here so they can continue feeding and developing until they themselves mature. Many years later, upwards of 30 to 50 years is how long it takes for a sea turtle to mature, and then go back to its mating grounds and start the whole cycle again. So already you can see that there's various life history traits that make them really vulnerable to overexploitation. So I'm going to go through some of the ways that sea turtles are unfortunately affected. In a lot of parts of the world, there's directed fishery of sea turtles. People love to eat them. They use their shell for various products. So there's directed catch. But also, unfortunately, they're caught as bycatch in a lot of fisheries as well, whether it's long lines or in big net fisheries. There's a lot of disease that unfortunately is very contagious and spread throughout population. So this is fibropapillomavirus, which unfortunately, unless you can fully remove those growths, there's no way to help those turtles, and they'll eventually starve. Or maybe they won't be able to see a predator, for instance. And then, as hopefully many people are aware, there's a huge increase in the amount of marine debris in the oceans, and turtles unfortunately interact with that, whether they're getting stuck in pollution or they might even be ingesting it as well. Here we see a couple of things in action. Hopefully, if you cock your head to the left, you can see this is actually the peninsula of Florida. And you can see straight away there's a lot of light pollution there, and that means there's a lot of development. So a few things at play here. First of all, habitat degradation and destruction through us developing more and more in the coastal zones and more people living there, and therefore we're losing habitat that these sea turtles rely on for nesting and for feeding. But also, all that light causes a lot of disorientation for those little hatchlings when they're emerging, or even when females are trying to go back to their beach where they were born. They come back 30 years later and somebody built a pool there. So this is one of the other factors at play that unfortunately have caused a huge decline. And when I say a huge decline, something that I think is hard for us to wrap our heads around is something that's now given a term. It's called shifting baseline. So if you look at this happy photo on the dock at the end of the day, this is a pretty impressive sized fish there, I think you'll agree. And so if you imagine back in 1958, this was considered a really great day fishing. Over time, as maybe fish size has declined or catch numbers have declined, those small incremental changes might be something you don't realize if it's happening outside of your lifetime. And what can happen is that you come to a more modern day, so for instance, like 2007, maybe this is considered a really fantastic day, right? Because you don't know that there used to be much bigger fish and different species, perhaps. And this is the same thing that has happened with sea turtles and that we're facing right now as well. So if you look back, and these are animals that I forgot to mention, they've been around millions of years. what we don't realize, but just by looking at populations in present day, is that in the Caribbean alone, sea turtles populations have declined over 97%. That's a huge, huge drop. And we don't realize it because it's happened over centuries. Now, if we focus in particularly in the Bahamas now, some of the sea turtles that we find here, so there are 7 species worldwide, and we see the leatherback, loggerhead, hawksbill, and the green sea turtle here in the Bahamas. And you can see their different levels of threat that they're facing. The leatherback is known as vulnerable globally, but there are distinct subpopulations that are even more endangered. The loggerhead is endangered, as is the green, and the hawksbill is critically endangered, as it was traditionally harvested for the use of its carapace for jewelry and so on. Now, hopefully I've made it clear, sea turtles have been around a very long time. They're now they've been in danger, and their populations have declined greatly. They do exist here in the Bahamas, and that's why it's such an incredible thing that in 2009, the government of the Bahamas banned all take and harvest of sea turtles in the waters of the Bahamas, which was really a fantastic conservation measure. And not only just because sea turtles are important, but when we look at the Bahamas, so previous work has shown through genetics that a lot of the turtles that we see here, whether you're snorkeling or out diving, they weren't necessarily born here. They've actually come from many other countries that span the Atlantic Ocean. So whether it's the west coast of Africa, South America, the Caribbean, and the Gulf of Mexico, even Florida, all those turtles spend time here in the Bahamas. So by protecting Bahamian sea turtles, we're actually protecting turtles from those countries as well. So yes, this is fantastic. There's a ban on sea turtles harvest. However, we do still see poaching, and sadly this follows a story that we've heard in some of the other presentations today. Here on Eleuthera, where we are, we specifically do see poaching in a lot of the sites that we go to research the sea turtles. So you can see here carapaces where the sea turtles must probably have been taken for meat. And so the point of this study was really to look at, when we talk about the ban, which has now been in effect for close to 7 years, what do local people understand about this ban? Are they aware that it even exists? How do they feel about it? And what do they even know about sea turtles in terms of putting this ban into context and what it can mean for the conservation of sea turtles as well? So we are here on Eleuthera. We're right on that southwest tip. Those points are our various study sites where we study juvenile green sea turtles specifically. And this study also focused on settlements in those areas where we would go out and interview people. So this was actually an island school semester project, so we had students involved in learning interview techniques, and they would go out into various settlements and approach people and ask them if they were interested in taking part in this survey, which was composed of 12 questions, and they would take notes, recording the answers. And the fantastic thing about this was that not only were we looking for answers for the survey, but we also used it as an opportunity to give information where people were maybe misunderstood certain facts or were confused or wanted to know more. It opened a conversation there where we could give more information and encourage education. So this is a list of the questions. So some basic things like, have you seen a sea turtle before? Where do you see them? How often would you see them? What do they eat? Where do they live? So trying to understand how much is known about the ecology of sea turtles. But then also, do they know there was a ban? Do they know of any other ways that sea turtles might be protected? And what maybe were their perceptions since the ban? Do they think they've increased or decreased in number? And how do they feel about the ban? Should it only be for non-Bahamians versus for everybody? And what do they think about sea turtles as a cultural resource as well? So this is the survey questions. We managed to complete 71 surveys over the course of the autumn. There's quite skewed. There's 51 males and 20 females. Generally, females weren't as willing to be interviewed, so there's a lot more men there. And you can see also the age range. And we also took some information like the educational level and the background, maybe what jobs people did. But all this was kept confidential. We didn't take anybody's name, and they also signed a release to say they were willing to give up this information as well. So if we look at some of the results, I was pretty impressed with this. So in terms of knowledge of the ban, about 64% of the interviewees were aware there was a ban. There's typically significantly more males that were aware of it, and of the older age classes, potentially because those were more likely to be fishermen or people that were interacting with the ocean. And in other respects, only 6% of the interviews could actually name any other sea turtle conservation initiatives, for instance, size limits and so on. In terms of ecological knowledge, about half of the respondents were able to correctly name one or more species of sea turtle. So common ones being like the loggerhead and the green turtle and the hawksbill, and some even being aware of the leatherback as well. Now, when we started to go in deeper and ask, what do sea turtles eat? Where do they live? There was a large proportion of people that believe that sea turtles all eat conch, so all of them. And that's typically it's a diet item of the loggerhead, for instance, but not necessarily the green turtle, which are the turtles that people see more often in coastal areas. And then you can see they also listed seagrass, fish, and other items as well. In terms of Bahamian perceptions, so again, there's quite positive response in terms of people believing that the ban was important. They also thought it was important to promote healthy ecosystems, but there's a slightly negative response in that they believe that potentially it should only be the case for non-Bahamians in terms of harvesting sea turtles. But yet again, a really high proportion of people believe that it was important to protect sea turtles in the Bahamas. So what does this mean? Well, it shows that there is Bahamian support for conservation initiatives, first of all. So when you get out there and talk to people, there is a lot of encouraging responses. It also helps highlight the gaps. So what do people not know? What kind of information do people need so they can understand better why these conservation measures are in place? And also helps identify which should be your target audiences for various education programs. I just want to pull up an example. I think a lot of people maybe saw this picture in the last couple of weeks on social media. And it highlighted a few things. So this is a tiger shark that was caught off near Staniel Key. And there was a lot of outrage. If you look at a lot of the Facebook comments that are on there, people were generally pretty upset that this had happened. A lot of people were like, Bahamas is a shark sanctuary, and this shouldn't be happening. Sharks are important. But there's also a lot of fear in there. It also highlighted there were a lot of people that wanted to help enforce regulations, but they didn't necessarily know what the regulations were either. And so we need to look at moving regulations off these kind of obscure bits of paper and making sure that they're actually out in the public and that people in charge of enforcing these measurements know that they exist as well, because there is a lot of public will. Now, just side note, I personally think what's going on around the corner from Staniel Key is a lot more terrifying. There's these ravenous pigs trying to eat peekaboos off the beach. So. But seriously, what's important is what it comes down to really is education. It's something that we've been doing a lot at CI and also lots of other groups, Family Island, Research and Education, Brief, the Bahamas National Trust, the Friends of the Environment. Lots of people understand that it's important to get people out interacting with these animals and really seeing a fascination and understanding the beauty and learning more about them and understanding them so that they will also protect them. So there's a young students. It's also important to get adults out there, of course. So this is an example of something that we've been doing at CI. We call it InReach. So our own staff, the same people that want to get out there, and they want to go and do what the researchers are doing. So this is one of our shark research team. They went out. There's our kitchen manager, the guy that makes biodiesel, our housekeeper, and they're all out there catching these huge stingrays off at the Schooner Keys with Owen. We took them out. They were helping us catch turtles as well. And so again, these people are getting up close with these incredible animals, starting to understand more about them, appreciating them, and they will be the ones that hopefully will be in the communities saying, no, don't harvest sea turtles, no, you shouldn't be eating those, and will help in terms of the conservation of these animals. So in terms of next steps, we're hoping to get out and conduct these surveys in more islands and just keep working together in terms of education and making sure people understand why sea turtles are important and why it's important that we conserve them so that they will continue for a long time. My 2 minutes are up. Okay. Thank you all very much.